Hello, and welcome to another episode of Access, brought to you in part by participants in Smart Recovery's Insiders Plus program. I'm Luke Frazier. Today on the program, we're going to speak with Katie Lane. She's a co-founder of Thrive Alcohol Recovery and an advocate of the Sinclair Method for treating alcohol use disorder. One note before we start, the opinions expressed today are those of Katie Lane's and do not necessarily represent the views of or endorsement by Smart Recovery. Katie Lane, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Luke. I'm really excited to chat with you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let's start with your story, a little bit of your story about your relationship with alcohol and some of the ways that it may have brought you to the Sinclair Method.
Absolutely. I love talking about this just because it's become really a huge passion of mine, because I struggled with alcohol for about a decade, and it was something that I really tried to get under control for about half that time. Like, I was genuinely trying different treatment programs, trying to moderate my drinking, trying to control my drinking, just quitting drinking literally dozens of times, saying, okay, this is it, I'm never going to drink again. And what kept happening for me is I kept going back to these unhealthy habits of drinking, and nothing was seeming to work for me. And in fact, my drinking seemed to be just getting worse over that time. I was in the habit of drinking at least a bottle of wine every night. I could easily drink more than that, but that was usually the dose I would allow myself, just so I knew I could function at work the next day. And then the weekends, I really would day drink, like starting Saturday at 11 all the way till Sunday evening, and Mondays were always really rough. And I was pretty much drinking 7 days a week. I would try to force myself to have alcohol-free days, just because I think, oh, I haven't had an alcohol-free day in a couple of weeks or a couple of months or even longer. I really need to have one. And they were always really difficult for me. If I was really hungover, I could have an alcohol-free day, but it was me just more so recovering. So,
what reminds me of a phrase that you hear, that if you're trying to control your drinking is controlling you. And that's something
perfectly said.
Yeah, that's what I let people know on this show. I'm actually in recovery myself. And so that's what I've heard when people talk in support groups about what happened with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you kind of, like all of us, like I was in denial about it. I was like, I can get this under control, and I would try again and again and again. And very rarely was I successful to control my drinking. It almost always went out of control, which is why I would try to quit over and over again. And so this battle went on for the better part of 10 years. And I was feeling really frustrated toward the end, almost got a DUI, and just was like, almost in a sense praying for my rock bottom, thinking, well, maybe if it gets really bad, then it'll finally wake me up and force me to be able to stay sober. So that's where I wound up around that time, learning about the Sinclair Method.
Mm-hmm. How did that happen? I mean, did a friend of yours tell you, or did you see something on the web, or how did you really first identify the Sinclair Method?
Yeah, so like I did oftentimes when I was really hungover, I'd be scouring the internet looking for answers. I would spend hours and hours watching inspiring stories of people who were sober and alcohol-free and how they did it. And I'd always feel really inspired and think, okay, I can do this. But it never worked for me. And so one day, scouring the internet, I stumbled upon a famous TEDx talk by a woman named Claudia Christian. She's an actress, and it was titled "How I Overcame Alcoholism," I think was the name.
And you said, I want to watch this one.
Yeah, I was like, here we go, 1,000 videos in, like maybe this will be the answer. But she spoke of the Sinclair Method, and I was like, whoa, like that's a radically different approach that I'd never heard of before. Like this, it seemed too good to be true. And that's what I hear from people say all the time. So,
well, had you tried any other method, any other program prior to that? I mean, you said you had gone back and forth and you were trying to quit, and then you would try to slow down, whatever ways that you first, started addressing it. Had you discovered or tried any other programs?
So I tried AA, but only a couple of times. It was not for me. The local AA group, it was not for me. I knew that. I didn't know about SMART at the time, to be honest. So I'm sure that would have been one of my tools that I should have tried or wish I would have tried. But I more tried to do it on my own through reading a lot of like quit lit books, or doing spiritual retreats or meditation retreats, or changing my diet, or really getting into something like fitness or another hobby. I would just like, each time I went sober, I'd throw myself into something, and like that would help for a little while, but then eventually my brain would continue to crave alcohol, and sooner or later a trigger would set me off and I would return to drinking again.
Yeah.
I never did any official program or anything like that, other than like support that's online and things like that.
But I think that's a very good point, that, you were trying to substitute something for your alcohol use. And as you said, it worked for a period of time. It gave you some relief. But because alcohol is a particular, substance, that there's other things going on besides not wanting to drink.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you had not heard of SMART at that time, I think you said. When did you first hear about SMART?
I heard about it a couple of years ago, actually, because after going through the Sinclair Method and finally getting free of my problems with alcohol, I've become a Sinclair Method coach and offer a program to help people. And over the years, clients have come to me and say, oh yeah, I attend SMART meetings, or I use the SMART tools. And so I was like, I was familiar with SMART by that time, but I was like, I didn't really know what it was. And so through my Sinclair Method clients, actually, they would tell me about it. And the past 6 months or so, I would say I've been diving into materials more, looking into becoming a facilitator, and just find that they're so practical and honestly a great complement to the Sinclair Method.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk more about, what the Sinclair Method is for people who don't know, but I just think that they work really well together, to be honest, which is why I'm super interested in it.
Sure. Now, I'm always interested in how people first learn about SMART, but you're right. I want to get in depth for the Sinclair Method. One thing that strikes me right away, as far as your term practical, that it's practical, the Sinclair Method, what I know of it, and also Smart Recovery is very practical tools, practical ways that the support group functions, all those kinds of things. So it really is a big overlap. If you, I guess, picture a Venn diagram of sorts, you'd see a big part in the middle. And that also is, I think, the similarity is with harm reduction principles. But before we get into all that, let me remind people that are watching Access. And we're talking with Katie Lane. She's a co-founder of Thrive Alcohol Recovery. And we're talking about the Sinclair Method. So let's go right into it. Tell me about the Sinclair Method, the basics of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So the Sinclair Method, first of all, it's called the Sinclair Method because it was discovered by a physician over 30 years ago who was named Dr. David Sinclair. So over time, it took on his name because it's a very specific protocol that he researched and discovered was effective for treating alcohol use disorder. So the method itself involves taking a medication called Naltrexone. It's an opiate blocker medication, not to be confused with opiates. A lot of people ask me if it's addictive or dangerous or expensive, and it's none of those things. It's not a habit-forming or addicting medication. It's generic in the US, so it's very cheap and even free if you have a medication insurance. So following this method, how it works, and quickly, by the way, too, naltrexone is FDA approved for treatment of alcohol use disorder in the US, and it's been that way since '94.
That probably reassures some people, because as you said, people hear it as an opioid blocker or opioid, what's the term you used? The
antagonist.
Antagonist, correct.
Yeah.
Now, I know people who are antagonists in my life, but that's something different.
Yeah, that's for another call.
Okay, good. I'm sorry, go ahead. So it is approved by the FDA.
Yeah, it's approved by the FDA. But what the Sinclair Method is that it's a very specific way to take the medication. And essentially that protocol is you take the medication 1 to 2 hours before you drink. So as you mentioned earlier, this is a harm reduction protocol. It's not one where you have to quit drinking and be abstinent as a first step. And in fact, for me, that was like it felt like a really gentle way to go about it, I think, because my brain was still addicted to alcohol in some sense. And so the fact that I could still drink, but what I had to do was take this medication before, gave me a sense of peace that, okay, I don't have to give up this substance that I'm, wired to crave essentially. But by taking this medication, it's going to help me unlearn the patterns of alcohol use disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And it does that because it's an opiate blocker. When we drink, our brain gets a flood of endorphins and pleasure hormones. And that's why it's so pleasurable and so addicting. And so when we take this medication before, it's going to block those pleasure hormones that our brain experiences. And so it makes drinking just a little less euphoric, a little less interesting. And often people say, well, what's the point if it's not pleasurable? And I will say there is still pleasure to be had when you drink on naltrexone. In fact, I enjoyed it more because I had control. I finally had that off switch when I drank. I wasn't going to go out and fear that I was going to get really drunk or black out. I'd go out and know I was going to have one or two drinks and not have more.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a long-term treatment protocol. It's not an overnight fix. Typically, we tell people to give it a year. But what's happening throughout that journey on the Sinclair Method is that people are seeing really big improvements in their drinking, and they're really changing their relationship with alcohol. They'll see themselves have easier alcohol-free days. They'll be able to have an off switch like I had, where they just have one or two and they don't want more. You can either be a moderate drinker with this method if you continue on the protocol, or people can go abstinent and their brain is essentially restored to where it was before they had alcohol use disorder. So you're no longer battling cravings or afraid of relapsing.
Yeah. Well, I think you identified something important, that although you were taking the naltrexone, there still was a habit. You still had probably in the environment of meeting people and in a bar, a lounge, a restaurant, and you were used to like ordering a drink once you sat down. So there was, that aspect of it, as well as the dependence, the alcohol use disorder to a substance. So I think is that what you're dealing with Sinclair Method? After the drug starts to work, you also have to address the habit.
Yep, you said it so perfectly. And honestly, that's where the SMART tools come in really handy, because we often tell people the medication and the Sinclair Method, it's a foundation. For me, I would not be where I am today without it, but it's about 50% of it. And the other 50% is then, how am I going to fill my time? If I drink a bottle of wine every night, well, if I've been doing that for 20 years, what else do I do in my evenings to unwind or relax and things like that? So one of the biggest challenges I see with this method is that people rely only on the medication and they're not changing their behaviors. And so, through this method, it becomes much easier to change your behaviors because it's fixing your brain so that you don't drink to excess, or it's much harder to drink to excess and you're not craving as much. So there's more space to really change habits, have alcohol-free days, and, create a life that revolves less around alcohol.
Yeah. Well, that's so different from some of the, I guess, the earlier generations of treating alcohol use disorder, like antabuse. From what I understand about antabuse, basically you would get really sick if you took that medicine and then drank. So, is that something that you understand to be an earlier generation of this kind of medication?
Yeah, sort of, and actually I know a lot of doctors who work with the Sinclair Method and naltrexone who won't even prescribe antabuse because they find it inhumane. It does work for some people, because as you said, if you take it and you drink on it, you become deathly ill. And so it's a motivation to not drink. But in my opinion, you're not fixing the root cause. So people are still wanting to drink and fighting the urges, and you're just, giving them something that'll make them really sick. And so people still use it, but I think it's kind of an antiquated way to treat the problem now that we know about naltrexone and other medications as well.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And inhumane is like, you're taking a hammer and knocking yourself out and then saying, well, gee, I didn't drink. Well, you were knocked out. How could you? So that's, I think we're much beyond that with drugs like naltrexone. Now, you talked a little bit about the length of time, maybe giving it some time. Is that part of the challenge of people who are trying to use the Sinclair Method, that they don't stick with it?
That is one of the challenges. Either they give up too soon because they're not seeing fast enough results. And sometimes people just have unrealistic expectations where they don't really understand that it should take a year. And they think if they don't see results in a couple of weeks, they're like, oh, this doesn't work. And so they'll quit early. I meet a lot of people that do that. And then they discover, oh, it's a long-term protocol. Okay. Also compliance with it, being sure that you're always taking the pill beforehand. That's called the golden rule. And it's truly vital to success. Even if someone skips the pill once a month or once in a while, it's really going to set them back because your brain's going to be getting reward from alcohol sometimes. And that's going to be very reinforcing, kind of like how we get rewards when we gamble and we never know when it's going to come. But when it comes, We're like, yay.
Right. Now, I don't know how I'm picking this back from my psychology classes all that long ago, but isn't intermittent reinforcement actually
Exactly.
stronger? Okay,
Yes,
see?
you spot on. You know your stuff.
All right.
Yep.
So all right. I'm now, that makes me feel good. I remembered something from my undergrad days.
That's awesome. That's exactly what is at work when people aren't fully compliant with the medication. So sometimes it takes people a few times. They're like sort of ready, and they dabble with it, but then they realize, okay, I see how important it is, so I'm going to stick with it now.
Yeah. Well, let's follow that a little bit more as far as let's say a person is compliant and does use it as prescribed and does use it consistently and doesn't, as you say, kind of occasionally not. So what happens over time with, do you continue taking naltrexone or do you graduate from taking it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the end goal of this method is what's known as pharmacological extinction, or extinction for short. And that really means your brain has essentially been reset to where it was before you had alcohol use disorder. So your brain is no longer wired to crave alcohol. And when that happens, people become indifferent to alcohol. And so one client told me that the wine now just blends in with the other condiments in her refrigerator. Like she doesn't obsess on it or think about it or feel like she needs to drink it. It just becomes this inanimate object, so to speak. So once someone has reached extinction, they kind of have two choices. Some people choose to go abstinent and stop drinking, and because their brain is fixed and they don't really want to drink anymore. Of course, because the medication is only taken when you drink, they don't take the medication anymore. But if someone does continue to keep alcohol in their life, which is a totally reasonable goal with the method, they should still continue to take the medication 1 to 2 hours before they drink, because it's like their protection. Because our brains can relearn the alcohol use disorder. I've known a few people over the last 5 years who have been able to return to moderate drinking without the medication, but for me, that's playing with fire. I'm one of the people that went sober through this method. I haven't drank in 3.5 years, but I have the option.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. Unexpected was not the plan. I was like, yay, I can moderately drink, but I just fell out of love with alcohol. But if I were to drink again, which the option's on the table, I would take the naltrexone before, just to protect my brain from relearning the pattern.
Well, what happens if someone doesn't take it 1 to 2 hours? Let's say they're someone calls them up and says, "Hey, let's meet at Joe's Lounge," and then you take it, and it's only been 30 minutes.
Yep, that's another challenge for people. Is it does require more planning, because those spontaneous things do happen. And so the reason people need to take it 1 to 2 hours before is because it fully blocks the receptor. So if someone only waits 30 minutes or even 45 minutes, it's not fully blocked. So they're going to be getting that endorphin reward, at least partially, and it can cause them to, drink more or drink quicker, things like that. And so it's really important that they wait at least an hour. I remember one time I accidentally only waited 45 minutes. And I just remember thinking, like, that buzz we get where we're just like, hey, I want another drink. I want another drink. And I was like, oh, the medication, I must have not waited the full hour. I could see the difference.
Well, I think what could happen too is that if you realize that this time I didn't take it with enough lead time, doesn't mean I have to abandon the program. It just means that I'll be more careful next time, and I'll make sure it's 1 to 2 hours. So, you know what I mean? Like it's people need to also have this sense of their own agency, that they can use it and use it successfully.
Absolutely. And it's those times where people, even if someone skips taking it and they did it on purpose, it's like, okay, well, you can learn from it and move on from it. It doesn't mean you have to throw in the towel or that you have to beat yourself up. Like, yeah, you made a mistake. Oh, well, like, let's move on from it. And I think that's so important with this method. It's not like AA, where if you have one drink, you're back to square one again, which to me is just, I don't knock AA. It's worked for people in my family, but it never worked. It wasn't for me.
Yeah. So we've heard the basics. We understand some of the ways that it works. Is there research that kind of backs this up that you are aware of?
Yes, there's so much research, actually. A lot of it is from the 90s and early 2000s, when Dr. David Sinclair was doing his research on this medication. There's research on both animal studies with rats as well as human clinical trials as well. And what is truly amazing about this protocol is that through all of this research, it has been clinically proven to have a 78% success rate, which is just astounding. And of course, that is when someone is fully compliant and they're following the correct protocol and giving it enough time to work. And so there's a lot of research out there. There's a nonprofit called C3 Foundation. They have a lot of the research on their website. I have a number of papers that I refer to and share with people. If I could share those with you so you could have them. But yes, there's a lot of evidence and research to back this up.
Yeah. And so that can help also. A couple of things, knowing that naltrexone is FDA approved and knowing that there is some research basis for this, I think can maybe alleviate some of the concern that people might have about this Sinclair method.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I find that even with skeptical family members or friends, because, if someone's struggling with alcohol, the go-to logical thing is, well, stop drinking. And of course that makes sense. But when family members are really struggling with like, okay, they're going to be able to drink on this method, like, I don't want that. I find if they can look into the research and really ground into that it's evidence-based and there's data to back it up, it can help them to have that anchor while someone is getting started on the treatment protocol. And I should say too, there's a book called The Cure for Alcoholism by Dr. Voya, where he really dives into all of this research and gives real life examples. And it's all about the science of the Sinclair method. And you can get that Amazon or anywhere.
And I think that's another overlap with smart recovery, is this idea that being evidence-based. And so there's ways that you can look at cognitive behavioral therapy and other things that are used that, show that people who are correctly using and following these kinds of things are having success.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things about Smart and why it's such a compliment is, like, kind of like you were saying earlier, it's like the medication is working in the background. Someone is still able to drink, but their brain is being rewired essentially of the disordered behavior. And then you bring in tools like Smart, and it's those tiny mindset shifts that Smart brings with the tools and the questions that really can help people to think about things differently. Like even just going through the cost benefit analysis, or I love is it called like the value system? I love that one because
hierarchy of values.
Yes, that one is like so powerful when people because people can get stuck in the habits of drinking on the Sinclair method and they'll feel like, I can't imagine an alcohol-free day. But if you do that exercise with them, they realize, like for most people, alcohol's nowhere on the list. And it just helps them like, whoa, like, okay, then why am I hanging on to this, comfort blanket of my nightly bottle of wine when I don't really want it? And it just, it opens up so much. So I think honestly, they're great complements to each other.
Yeah. Now you talked about talking with people about the Sinclair method. I understand you consider yourself a coach for this method. Is that part of what Thrive Alcohol Recovery does?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've been a coach for 3.5 years now on this method. And then with Thrive, we have several other coaches who are Sinclair Method certified, most of them having gone through the method themselves. And we also have video courses that really guide people through it step by step, and community support as well.
I want to kind of shift into something. I read a quote on your website that I thought was so powerful, and I'm going to read it to you and ask you to talk about it a little bit more. It's and this comes from you, I believe. In fact, it starts, "I believe everyone has a purpose to live and a reason they are on this earth, and overconsumption of alcohol just completely robs that from you. Please don't ever give up. Please keep going. Please keep fighting for your future self because there is so much waiting for you on the other side." That's a beautiful quote.
Thank you so much. And I just, going through my own struggles with alcohol, it's really a trap that you are stuck in, I think. And as you start to get out of it, for me through the Sinclair method, as I started to think about alcohol less and feel like it had less control over my life, where I just didn't care about it as much, I started to glimpse that there's a whole huge world out there. And I'd been living in this tiny little box of just living for my next drink every day, thinking about drinking. Should I drink? I shouldn't drink. Where am I going to drink? Oh, I can't go there because they won't have drinks. It's just like this obsession that was going on in my mind that I was honestly not even very aware of. And I honestly believed everyone thought about alcohol that much. And as I got free of it, I'm like, oh, that's not normal. Okay. But I think a big part of people succeeding on this method, and even with Smart or anything, it's getting excited about that future and realizing there's a life outside of the reward that we get from alcohol. We know alcohol is addictive because it gives us so much reward in our brain. And so we live for that when we have alcohol use disorder. But if we can realize that that's not the only game in town, and I really do believe, like that quote said, like everybody has a purpose here. And if we can just get out of the alcohol fog and the alcohol trap and seek that out and even just get a glimpse of it, like we won't ever be able to look back. And so I think when people struggle with this method, it's like I had one lady, she was about retired and she's like, my kids are moved out. Like I don't really have anything to look forward to. And she was stuck in this cycle of habitual drinking on the Sinclair Method, even though it was far less and the medication was working. She just didn't have a lot to look forward to in her future. And so I think that is so important. No matter what age we are, it's like we've got something ahead of us that is far better than our habits around alcohol.
Right. I mean, SMART talks about living a healthy and balanced life, and also life beyond addiction. That there is life, and that's what you're talking about. Is there something out there kind of waiting for you, and you can realize that beauty and that freedom to do a lot of different things that you're not obsessed with alcohol will provide.
Yeah. And, it's like the little things in life. It's so cliche, but it's those little things in life that bring deep joy and peace in a way. And I think when I was stuck in my alcohol addiction trap for so long, it's like I wasn't feeling genuine joy during that time. I would get a happy buzz, and sure, I'd have fun with friends, but like that joy that exists within us just because we're alive and we can appreciate a sunset or, those cliche things, it's like that was impossible with alcohol. And I realized that as I escaped the trap of it. And so now that I can experience those simple joys of life, it's like no alcohol buzz is worth that at all.
Right. Well, the cliches are cliches for a reason. They can be true. And that's what we have to realize. But we don't always appreciate them. And that's where I think people who would say, oh, a sunset, that's so cliche, that means they're not appreciating it, because then they wouldn't worry about it being a quote cliche.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I think like the older I get and the longer I've been alcohol free, I just realized like all those cliches are absolutely true. And it's the simple joys of life that really matter.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to tell us about Thrive Alcohol Recovery or the Sinclair Method that we haven't covered, Katie?
I just think that for people to be aware, if they're curious to learn more about the Sinclair Method, we have a lot of information on our website. Of course, we offer our program to guide people through it, but if someone just wants to get started, they can go to their doctor. The doctor may or may not give them a prescription if they're, not well-versed in addiction treatment. It's just how it is, but there's online telehealth doctors that will provide it. If you're curious to try it, it's a great complement to SMART. So it's really easy and affordable to get started for people. Like I said, the prescription is almost free if you have a prescription plan. I think I paid $30 for a month without insurance. So it's a low bar to entry. And if you're struggling to, control your drinking or get sober on your own, or even through SMART, if you feel like you could use another tool to go along with that, I definitely encourage you to look into the Sinclair Method.
That's Katie Lane. She is a co-founder of Thrive Alcohol Recovery. She's a coach for those using the Sinclair Method and a real advocate for using the Sinclair Method for treating alcohol use disorder. Katie, thank you so much for being here. It was a great conversation.
Luke, I enjoyed it so much. Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Access, brought to you in part by the participants of Smart Recovery's Insiders Plus program. I'm Luke Frazier. Until next time, stay healthy and stay connected.